Hello, my name is Bogdan Petromerginian, and today I'll be sharing a project I completed for Path 528 Transitional Justice, a children's book I created titled The Onondaga Journey, A Tale of Tradition and Resilience. The goal of this presentation is to explore how children's literature can be a powerful tool for advocating Indigenous representation in education and to consider policy changes that could better support this effort. To begin, I'd like to introduce the book and share a bit about my personal motivation behind creating it. The Onondaga Journey is a culturally responsive children's book focused on transitional justice and Indigenous culture. It's designed to educate young readers about the history, struggles, and resilience of the Onondaga people with a special emphasis on environmental stewardship and Indigenous rights. At its core, the book aims to foster empathy, respect, and a sense of responsibility from an early age, while challenging the marginalization of Indigenous voices in mainstream narratives. I drew inspiration from works by Onondaga artists and authors and made a conscious effort to represent everyday life in Onondaga communities, the way people speak, their relationship with the land, and the traditions that sustain their identity. So, this project was born from two moments of realization. The first was reading a New York Times article in March of last year which covered Onondaga Nation's reparations lawsuit. What stood out was the nation's call for recognition over land reclamation. Their focus was to educate the younger generation about the loss of land and culture and why that history still matters. To me, a government that fails to acknowledge that loss is also failing to recognize the identity and history of its people. The second moment came during a conversation with a friend who questioned the relevance of discussing Indigenous oppression today. His comment reflected a broader sentiment that the past injustices are behind us and discussing them only divides. But that view erases present day consequences of colonization. It made me realize how normalized Indigenous erasure it remains in our culture and inspired me to take action. So, Indigenous erasure is deeply embedded in the American education system. Accurate histories and stories written by Indigenous authors are largely absent from public school curricula. Often, Native American content is limited to brief mentions during units on early settlers, framed as passive historical actors. This flattens centuries of resistance and rich cultural history. Narratives continue to center settler colonial perspectives, like how Thanksgiving is still widely taught as a harmonious event between settlers and native peoples, ignoring the violence that followed, or how Columbus Day remains celebrated despite its association with colonization and genocide. Many still resist renaming it Indigenous Peoples Day, not fully understanding the harm in honoring someone whose legacy is one of displacement and violence. This erasure extends to children's media. A 2015 study from the University of Wisconsin-Madison found that only 0.9% of children's books that year featured Indigenous characters, and half of those were misrepresentations. That means authentic Indigenous stories are not only rare, but often distorted. These gaps reinforce stereotypes and leave young readers without exposure to Native voices that reflect real communities. So, understanding how settler colonialism intersects with education is crucial. As Brad Boy, one of the articles that I read for this presentation, explained, education has long been used as a colonial tool to assimilate Indigenous children, suppress Indigenous knowledge systems, and facilitate land seizure. Education in the U.S. has historically favored Western thinking, positioning Indigenous knowledge as inferior. This erasure continues today through political decisions, structural barriers, and curricular omissions. The consequences are significant. Cultural misunderstandings persist, and many still believe Indigenous communities face no present day struggles, but systemic issues like environmental degradation and displacement continue. For example, the Onondaga were forced near a lake that became too polluted to sustain life. Losing access to clean water, central to their cultural and physical well being, is a quiet, ongoing form of violence. While researching, I encountered books like The Six Cedar Trees that try to represent Indigenous traditions, but end up oversimplifying them. While not created with authentic engagement, these books can do more harm than good, flattening diverse cultures into stereotypes or symbolic tropes. So, once again, this is why storytelling matters. It's a form of transitional justice, acknowledging harm while uplifting truth. Children's literature is especially powerful. It simplifies complex issues while nurturing emotional understanding. Books like The Onondaga Journey don't just educate, they humanize. They serve as a bridge connecting young readers to cultures that they might not otherwise encounter, and equipping them with empathy, curiosity, and respect. These early moments of learning can grow into deeper These early moments of learning can grow into deeper commitment into equity and inclusion. To truly address Indigenous erasure, we need structural change. First, we must mandate Indigenous studies in K-12 education developed in close collaboration with tribal nations. Indigenous voices must shape how their histories are taught. Second, we must fund Indigenous creators, writers, illustrators, and publishers to ensure diverse and authentic stories are told. And finally, we must empower tribal-led curriculum design to ensure community ownership and cultural accuracy. These steps are essential for building a more inclusive and truthful education system. Key stakeholders in this effort include State Department of Education, tribal education departments, school boards, and children's publishing industry. Collaboration among these groups is crucial to ensure Indigenous perspectives are meaningfully represented in both education and in media. This project also demonstrates competency in Universal Competency 5 by fostering communication across cultural lines and elevating underrepresented voices. Through inclusive storytelling, it challenges dominant narratives and promotes justice-oriented learning environment. So, in closing, Indigenous erasure is not just a thing of the past, it's an ongoing injustice that we must actively confront. Children's literature is a powerful public service tool. It shapes how young readers see the world and each other. These stories are more than just books, they're entry points for structural change, cultural connection, and more than just society. Thank you.